This is a lovely group that I've met before. They've been here at least once before. This is a group of poets that have been holding annual workshops on Balston Beach for 12 years, sharing poetry, their inspiration, and walking on the beach. Tonight they'll explore the theme of a sense of place. Could be physical, emotional, geographical, or something else. And who are the Balston Beach Poets? Sue Burton. Sue is from Burlington, Vermont, and we have exciting news. It was recently announced that Sue is a finalist in the Vermont Book Awards for her book, Box. And the same book has also been awarded the 2 Sylvia's Press Poetry Prize, and it's a finalist for the Forward Indies Poetry Book of the Year. And her long poem, Little Steel, was also released in 2018, and she was awarded the 4th Genre's 2017 Steinberg Prize for her sonnet sequence box set. And Laura Foley hails from the hills of Pomfret, Vermont. She's the author of 6 poetry collections. The Glass Tree was a finalist for the New Hampshire Writers Project Outstanding Book of Poetry, and won a Forward Book of the Year award. Joy Street was honored with the Bisexual Writers Award. Night Ringing was a finalist for Forward Book of the Year, and her poems have been read by Garrison Keillor on Prairie Home Companion and Writer's Almanac. And Pam Harrison. Pam is a graduate of Smith College and Vermont College MFA program in writing. She was a finalist for the Walt Whitman Award, winner of the 2002 Penn Northern New England Discovery Poet Award, invited to read her poems at the Library of Congress, and has 5 collections published by World Tech Communications of Cincinnati. She lives in Norwich, Vermont. And Clyde Watson? Clyde divides her time between Truro and Etna, New Hampshire. And she is a woman of many facets. She's an award-winning children's book author and composer. She's written theatrical scripts for the Christmas Revels, the Summer Revels, and the St. Gaudens National Historical Site. Her poetry has appeared in the Pastoral magazine and a number of anthologies. She's a member of the Authors Guild of America, which hosts her website, ClydeWatson.com. And most importantly, she's a member of one of our favorite Truro families, the Watson family. And last but not least, Carol Westberg. She comes to us from Hanover, New Hampshire. Carol's book, Terra Firma, was a finalist for the Tampa Review Prize for Poetry and Slipstream, and was a finalist for the New Hampshire Literary Award for Outstanding Book of Poetry. And her poems have appeared in Prairie Schooner, Hunger Mountain, Valparaiso, Poetry Review, Calyx, and other journals. So please help me welcome the Balston Beach Poets.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you for organizing this and offering us this great space. The minute we walked in the door, Laura said we should have come here 8 hours ago. This is so hot. But so let's see. It's always a delight to have my poetry group come to Truro because we do a lot of crazy things, but we also shut ourselves in our rooms and write. So we have a good time. Given that our theme tonight is a sense of place, I'm going to start in Truro. What? Oh, how's that? Okay, sorry. I'm going to start in Truro as a literal place and then work outward and become less literal. And I think everybody in the room loves Truro for many of the same reasons: the light, the sand, the sun. Every now and again, we get a reminder of that there's not simply beauty and light, but also it's sort of a dark side. And my first poem is going to be about one of those things. This past year, there have been more than usual of those things. So this is called High Surf Warning. How can she ever bear to hear it now, this relentless roar of the ocean that used to ground her so, giving her strength and joy? Walking the beach together that October morning after the storm, the ocean still ferocious, she must have turned to look back at her son, just in time to see a towering wave curl over him, crash, and knock him sideways as the next one dragged him down and under, tossing up a splendor of spray and foam. Did she get another glimpse, his hair, his green shirt, before wild seas closed over the last of him, before she plunged without thinking into the wild surf to save him? It was then she felt her own body smashed down, sucked under, searing pain in one leg, wave after wave, pounding and grinding her across the turmoiled ocean floor, until gasping for breath, choking salt water and sand, she was finally flung ashore to face the rest of her life without him. His voice echoed in the cries of gulls. This one is called Snow Cover. Last night, after we argued, snow began falling, as if to obliterate the hopeless detail of all sorrows under a veil of white. Now, early morning, on our chastened walk up the dune, things never seen before stand out oddly. Brush marks tell where hawk wings grazed the earth in passing. Drifting flakes have settled in the winding hollows of coyote's stealthy trail, have joined with shadow to illuminate secret byways where mouse's track crosses our daily path on her journey to places we don't yet know or believe in. Benediction. The length of the beach lies deep in shadow. The dunes loom strangely tall at this hour of truth in the crashing waves that flatten out and hurry up the glistening slope of low tide, to turn and recede, leaving pearled reflections of twilight patterned with flecks of foam, shadows, murmurs, sadness. But now the last rays of sun slant through a break in the dune, straight out over black surf to a distant point on the sea, where white-capped waves roll in one by one, crowned with light, changing gold to rose to darkness. So now I'm going to move to the garden and read 3 poems. The third one is an imaginary garden, I guess you could say. The catbird also speaks of spring. Dressed warmly against cold May wind, I've come to start my garden, but it's begun without me. I'm met by an exuberance of green. Henbit and sheep sorrel billow up under woven mulch, pop up through every rip, every crack between strips. Even half-rotted logs, left all winter to hold things down, sprout funky green fringes from under moist bark. And where last year's deaths were dumped on the compost, a band of onions has sprung up, robust tops ready to eat. This one is called Crouched in the Garden, Digging. Bird skull in the earth, dormant roots, seed husk, bits of flowered china, roofing nails, rodent tunnel, nutshell etched by tiny teeth, broken clay pipe. What you see is not all there is. Even now, unwitting, You could be kneeling on a heart. View from the emergency room. Perhaps we were beginning the descent, for I could see far below the emerald island of our dreams rising from a sparkling sea. No matter that the sea was a puddle on the asphalt roof outside the window, and the island a mound of velvet moss growing under the drip of an air conditioner. As if from the window seat of an airplane, as if we would soon be touching down, I fixed my gaze on that paradise, glistening in the imagined distance. And as we flew closer and closer, I held my breath, waiting for the bump that would tell me we had made it. Now I'm going to read two poems from the place called Getting Old. This one is called Rehearsing for Old Age. Patience with buttons, practice that. Also with zippers, laces, latches, knobs, whatever holds things closed, open, together, but not always when you want them to, less and less so as time goes on. Patience with what can start, move, stop, wheels, legs, walkers, hearts, but can also slow down or get going too fast, especially on slopes. Patience with color, memory, light, taste of bacon, the scent of the rose, and all else that fades, and with that which can't be seen, heard, controlled, understood. Time, whispers, lost dreams, snowflakes, cats. This poem I wrote and used to give to friends when they turned 60, but I guess I need to write a sequel. It's called On Turning 60. Though warned how time flies, we laughed, spending it recklessly, like the baby turning its milk cup upside down in glee, then crying when nothing's left. My last poem is from out of nowhere. It's just one of those poems that I can never explain where it came from or why I thought of it. It just happened. It's called God in Her White Cubicle. A roll of Scotch tape lay senseless on the counter, nothing but dust and junk nearby. Eyeballs began to dry out. Soon it would be time to call it quits. Any fool could tell that. But only one knew the reason why, and she wasn't telling. Her name, of course, was God. She sat in her white cubicle, looking down, taking vague note of the chaos on earth, moving the strings absent-mindedly, but without regard for how confusing that was for her people. It made them feel aimless and out of control, which, actually, they were. But of course they concluded, with typical human hubris, that they were causing their own confusion. Even the believers among them failed to blame God. Meanwhile, up there in heaven, there was a butter shortage. It seems the angels had been sneaking extra pats to slather on their gingerbread at breakfast time, and now there wasn't enough left to make the God Queen's buttercream frosting a must on holy days. And so it went this sultry May morning. Thank you. So our next reader is Laura Foley.
Thank you, Clyde, for bringing us here to Balston Beach over and over again. And thank you to the library for hosting us tonight. I'm going to start with two poems from my collection, WTF. And WTF Of course, they were my father's initials. He was, during the war, World War II, he was a prisoner of war in China and Japan. Prayer, 1943. Dad and his fellow prisoners crouched under a shed, its roof a sieve of shrapnel holes, allowing rain they didn't notice any more than hunger, in their concentration on pawns, queens, bishops, rooks they carved from discarded toothbrush handles, from their mouths to God's ears. So as far as place, I wanted to place the war. And then I'll follow that with a poem in a different place. It's the apartment in which I grew up in New York City. It's called The Long View. After mother files for divorce and we all move out, before he marries a young Swiss who decorates their Christmas tree with burning candles, giving him anxiety, he lives alone, and we leave him alone with his 10th floor view of the sweeping East River, unfolding like an abstract movie of a possible future. Tidal currents churning into chill Atlantic Sea, muscling under Triborough Bridge at the nexus of Hell's Gate he turns from nightly, retiring to one of 5 empty bedrooms and bathrooms. Thick walls muting the city's urgencies, tugboats lowing warnings, sirens wailing toward each new disaster. After he remarries and fathers a baby he calls his second litter. After I watch them twirl on the once beige, newly aqua carpet, enjoying a moment's peace before their divorce and young daughter's death. Before his overtaxed heart's long decline, murmuring warnings as he shuffles from his bedroom's dark river view through long empty hallways, seeking some comfort he can't name, further wearing the fading, threadbare robe I inherit when the apartment is empty of him. So I have a new collection coming out in September. This is the review copy, and it's called Why I Never Finished My Dissertation. And I will read. This poem will bring us into the Cape. Gratitude list. Praise be this morning for sleeping late, the sandy sheets, the ocean air, the midnight storm that blew its waters in. Praise be the morning swim mid-tide, the clear sands underneath our feet, the dogs who leap into the waves, their fur sticky with salt. The ball we throw again and again. Praise be the green tea with honey, the bread we dip in finest olive oil, the eggs we fry. Praise be the reeds, gold and pink in the summer light, the sand between our toes, our swimsuits flapping in the breeze. And here's a poem from today. Gorgeous beach and lethal, I want to add, returning from my foray into the scariest beach I know, where in recent times one young man was pulled to his watery grave by a post-storm wave, another lost a leg to a great white, mistaking him for a seal. I see one this morning, not a shark, but shark's breakfast. Still, seeking a moment's buoyancy, immersion in sweet, cool, and salt, I jump in, paddle about, and, as I step out, am struck, not by a shark, but by a stone, wave-hurled full force at my shin, rock large enough to rupture skin. And so, hobbling, bleeding, I retreat from the beach to walls, a floor, shade from the too strong sun, to sit with a mug of coffee, reflect on yet another brush with the great beyond I can still hear through the screened-in porch. So I do have the evidence. This poem is made up of smaller pieces. It's called 9 Ways of Looking at Light. And it actually won a Cape Cod Poetry Prize, the Joe Gouveia Poetry Prize a couple years back. And it's set partially here and partially in Vermont. 9 Ways of Looking at Light. 1. We moved the bed so the head faces north. A wisdom we read from India. We dislodged a ghost. Her husband, who on these sheets 3 years ago expired. We altered the angle of our repose and sleep all night at peace entwined. We wake to morning hills, trees, a great expanse, a gentle dappled light new to us. 2. The patient avoids the hospital windows of view, turning from snow's glare and stripped winter trees, focusing on photos of dogs, children, his hunting awards taped to the wall, all invoking home where he'd prefer to be, this large man with his bright white beard who doesn't read much, doesn't pray, except now with me, both of us shy, until his eyes tear and his body shines from inside. 3. No dappling leaves, but enough snow on near branches now to illuminate our window, winter light grown greater with snow's reflection. 4. We begin it with experiment, hurling boiling water to the frozen air, watching it glitter like glass confetti crackling in the new year, an answered wish in every shining shard. 5. Cold wind whips snow so it swirls around our tallest pine, a halo of light circling a frigid angel or ghost from my or someone else's past, seeking company, or just floating in the crisp winter air for the wonder of it. 6. Not brown, not rust, but inexplicably white as bones, these remnants dry as dust, recall life crackling as wind shivers them in barren early spring. Not one bud yet gracing it. White leaves clung through snow and ice to shine and tremble in this Sunday light. 7. The dog shivers, wet from a late spring swim, whimpers as the wind pulls light from the pond, and we sit in shadows by the water she knows just last summer shone gold. 8. This sip of coffee over so quickly, this guiding lighthouse in the mistless harbor, moments before the season changes, this slip of wind along the bay, a sweater saving me from chill, this precious slant of summer sun, clouds arriving to veil the light, a gentle voice of waves on stone, it's this, it's this, it's this. 9. I walk this foggy dawn to see the seals where they sleep beneath the scrim rain makes of rising light, to hear the music of their steady breath, a holy time before the changing of the tide. The last poem I'll read is a tribute to Mary Oliver. It matters. It matters that Mary Oliver woke early and walked along the bay as morning sun tore the sheets of darkness from the sky. It matters that she carried a notebook and cared to look into a kingfisher's soul, to dig in wet sand for clams in which she later tasted the salt sea, erupting in her mouth like sex, that she let the soft body of her body love what it loved, which was Molly. It matters that she loved a woman. It matters that we each wake to stride our own snow dunes, that we find in each day something of value, even the last ash leaf hanging on a winter limb, shivering a bit, then falling into stillness, over and over to lose ourselves into something larger, something better. It matters that I clutch my stack of her books, those fields of light, now that her body has gone into the cottage of darkness. Thank you very much for listening. And the next reader is Sue Burton.
We're getting a lineup of water here. Well, many, many thanks to the Truro Library in Fisher and to Clyde for gathering us together for the reading and for our annual poetry retreats. So In honor of Tricia and all the work she and the library do for the community, I'm going to read a poem I read last year that she may remember. A poem that mentions a librarian with the heart of a biker. So, I decide to come back next life as a cocktail. A Marilyn Monroe of a drink. Plum lipstick, see-through skirt. Yes, I love being irresistible. Drink me, drink me. But which to become? A martini with beer, blue curacao and lemon twisties, or champagne with creme yvette, aromatic seeds, wild violets, brandy, dashed with cloves? Oh, life is such an adventure. Today's installment, a librarian with the transplanted heart of a biker starts to crave beef, and true story, goes out and buys a Harley. My drink is the color of a heart, has cravings, serialized romances, card tricks, anchovies. Would you drink me, if I'm infused with violets, petals tickling your throat? Oh, oh, it's metaphysical, the night sky fizzing, stars like gold canaries, cognac, chartreuse, the cadence of the moon, all that. Frog song. I'm the story you'll pick up and never put down. You will become thirsty. I grew up in Ohio, but have lived in Vermont since my 20s. But Ohio is my place when it comes to locating myself in poems. And if I'm not in Ohio, I'm in some weird place in my brain. So what I'm going to read today are some sections from a sonnet sequence. It's 15 prose sonnets about my great-aunt Nettie Bope, who in 1902 died of an illegal abortion in Columbus, Ohio. Years ago, I discovered a newspaper account that described Nettie as having been taken to the place of a Mrs. Beatty in delicate condition. I assumed that Mrs. Beatty had performed the abortion. I was drawn to Nettie's story because, well, it was a family secret, and I'd been trained as a physician assistant at the Vermont Women's Health Center and later worked for many years at Planned Parenthood. So Nettie actually has a connection to Balston Beach. At one of our annual retreats, when I was working on an early draft of poems about Nettie, Clyde went off to Jams, where she could get internet, and rushed back to the house. I Googled Nettie Bope. There were doctors involved, a huge trial. So this set me off to a major quest, poring over microfiche of 1902 and 1903 Columbus, Ohio newspapers. So I'm going to start by reading a poem in the voice of Nettie, written before I had all my extra information. Okay. And it's written to her sister Mabel, who is my grandmother. Letter from Antoinette Bope to her sister Mabel, May 24th, 1902. Oh, Mabel, that I feared. Have found a Mrs. Beatty. Rickety stairs up and up, 5 pine chairs and a picture of Jesus. She poked my belly through my dress and took my money and said, "Come back on the morrow." Mabel, the morrow is upon me. Fear, I am dizzy. God has slacked his grip. Rickety stairs, railings corded with rags, have mercy on me. Yet how can sin be raveled from the soul? Mrs. Beatty has a chipped tooth, though my landlady says, oh, by all accounts she's, if only, but Mabel, what other? Okay, so I'll read several of the sonnets that incorporated my research of Nettie's story. It's called Box Set. And sometimes sonnets are referred to as boxes because they're somewhat, it's not exactly the shape of a box, but somewhat. And but these are prose poems, but they're all 14 lines, so that makes them a sonnet. Box Set for my great aunt Antoinette Nettie Bope, 1880 to 1902. 1. Nettie in a pine box. The family Bible says, died young. Erased, then written in again. A scandal, my mother says. Botched, back alley, in all the papers. My mother's name is Moo. He took advantage, got her drunk. My great-grandma, Nettie's mother, Susan, I'm named for her, saw a bell of fire in Nettie's shoes left out on the landing. Why don't you go back to teaching? Names, begottens, a line of heroes toting muskets, bugles, our ticket to the DAR. Proper, Nettie's name erased. Who wrote it back? Moo says, our people didn't slight. Men's name, doing muskety things, no family tree for Antoinette. Antoinette Nettie Bope, Frenchified Ohio. My mother's name is Moo. She told me everything she knows. My name is Sooty. Sooty, don't brood. No one likes a gloomy puss. Nettie has a lovely tombstone down in Thurston. 3. Is it true Nettie wasn't pregnant? But she thought she was. Did she try one of those mail-order concoctions? The parsley seed cure? Did it screw up her hormones? Everybody took them, ads in church bulletins for blocked menses. But she was seen by doctors, Hoskinson and Cooks. Did they even know how to do a pelvic exam? They inserted implements, bent spoons, pen holders, wire attached. But can't repeat. 1968, Baltimore, ex waiting in a bar while I go to the doctor's to get a rabbit test, to get a phone number so somebody could drive me someplace in Pennsylvania, blindfolded. Ex had had a few beers by the time I got back to the bar. The doctor's waiting room was standing room only, thick with smoke. 4, standing room only, thick. I was 24. Nettie was almost 22. I found her, loved her, made her into myself. For years I had only one newspaper clipping. It is said the girl was taken to the place of a Mrs. Beatty on South Pearl Alley some time ago, and it was claimed she was in a delicate condition at the time. Beatty, no first name. Licensed midwife, whatever that meant in 1902. But in 1902, university-trained doctors, regular doctors, were on a crusade to license themselves to squeeze out the competition, the irregulars like Mrs. Beatty, who diluted the profession. Like me in 1976, apprenticeship trained at a women's health center. For years I had only one clipping and thought Mrs. Beatty was the abortionist. Nothing in the paper about doctors. You don't do abortions, do you, Sue? Moo asked me once. "11. Nettie died not knowing. Tell me it was a blessing. Sooty. How old was Mrs. Beatty? Was she motherly? Early on, she said, I try to do all the good and as little harm as I can, but I always get the worst. Nettie's own mother put a tiny pillbox on her head, shut herself up in the parlor. Her father said, no more girls will leave the farm. Now my mother at 83, 30 years older than Nettie's aged father when he was summoned to Columbus, standing in the graveyard down at Thurston, her hair so white, wearing the white wool coat she'd bought for my wedding years ago, her black patent leather pocketbook, enormous, slung over one arm. You don't have to lug around that purse, I call to her. It'll be perfectly safe in the car. She shakes her head and takes hold of the clasp with both hands. The Bopes are right here, she says. 12. Right here, Moo says again, clasping the Bope family headstone, frowning slightly. Her other grandparents were her favorites. The Bopes were a nervous bunch, she said, and the sisters fought like barn cats, but they were loyal to each other. Nettie's tombstone, a few feet down slope from her parents' graves, faces away from the churchyard in the direction of the old farm. A polished granite square wreathed with scraggly brown grass. Antoinette, daughter of W.W. and S.L. Bope, July 7, 1880, May 30th, 1902. It's a beautiful marker, Moo says. Now do you feel better? Back in the car, she looks tired, small. It's starting to drizzle. As we turn north from the cemetery out into the main road, she looks over her shoulder and sighs. She fumbles in her purse for her compact. Didn't you ever want children? And I'll read the last section, which is 6:15, and this will be my last poem. Actually, this is what's called an erasure poem, where you white out many of the words on the page. And I chose this form because Nettie's name had been erased. And many women are erased from history. So 15. erased. Nettie died not guilty. They dug the grave. And our next reader will be Carol Westberg.
I just hooray for libraries. Not just for air conditioning, just for everything they do. It's really important, the work you're doing, and I'm grateful to you all. Grateful, of course, to Clyde for bringing us together over and over. I'm going to start with a couple of poems from, can you hear me in the back? Okay, from my second book, Terra Infirma. Low tide. At low tide, everything will be revealed. Spiral shells abandoned by hermit crabs, a rusted hinge washed up on a plank, shining outlines of estuary pools on the long slope across the intertidal zone. Here, the last waves break away as I scan the expanse of silver green ridged with white, reflecting a coral sunrise. Spiny bones land next to a stranded jellyfish, still life of the rage that abrades my sorrow. So one of the things that has struck me more and more is how much we don't know about the people we pass anywhere in the street, and even people we think we know. We don't really know what's going on and what they might be carrying inside. This is called We Pass Like Thieves. We pass in the grocery store, wheeling our anonymous carts. We pass invisible as a summer breeze, tubes hidden under loose clothes. We pass, marked by scars, familiar to our lovers. Like sleepwalkers, our hands graze the banister on the way downstairs. We pass like thieves, stealing each day we can. Like the guilty, cleared of all charges. Like innocents, falsely accused. We pass for natives, unremarkable, unscathed. We pass like ghosts of our former selves, sorrows mingling in the air. Like snow geese overhead, we sweep north or south in season. We pass like comets, trailing our cosmic dust. And now I'm going to read, for me, new poems. I'm not fast. I don't write a poem every day like Laura and then read them in public. This is called Fear in the Middle. No place is safe with these forked microbes under my skin. Like you, I carry death inside. Pause and think about it. Feel it in the pit of my stomach, back of my throat, twitching in my right eye. I feel great, except I'm dying, confided Jane, before she exhausted her last option to slaughter the tumors invading her ovaries and spine. Brave, glittering soul, now gone from my sight. I want to want and not want. Do you want to come down into the slough where a body grows heavy as a house or bricks or logs? Some days, as a log, I float down a river of thought, barely aware I'm taking water in, bereft of my memory of how to swim. Like you, I face fear in the beginning and middle, never knowing how near the end is. On land, I feel safer in the middle of a herd, wanting not to be a sheep picked off at the periphery, most visible to wolves. This strategy does not protect us from ticks in the grass, landmines, sinkholes opening wide. Glittering souls, we brave on, shoulder to shoulder, approaching the edge. On the merits of being freeze-dried. Boiling water swirls in the pot. The egg drops from my spoon, and I turn down the heat, and legs naked as Derrida's before my cat, who licks any bare skin he can reach. Would he gnaw my bones underneath? In Sweden, my ancestors' descendants compost human remains, freeze a corpse in liquid nitrogen, shatter it in tiny pieces, nugget-sized, to mix with bacteria in biodegradable boxes to bury in the earth. How useful to continue in this way. Today, I watch the egg swirl, slow in its swirl, look a little deeper, and see the borders aren't fixed between my mother and the chicken, the egg, and me. So this poem ends with an image from Balston Beach, from walking on Balston Beach, and I'm sure many of you have seen something like this before. It's called Bitter House. In my fear, I'll end up bitter as chicory, and alone, wind whipping long grasses in the dunes. With my fear, I'll end up like the husband I left in the wake of my faithlessness, both of us wandering a wilderness of concrete streets. No one to go home to, no one to talk to in the swaddling dark. Past my fear, I'll end up bitter as burdock root, like a child beaten with her father's studded belt, grown scarred and angry, leaving home afraid of no ghost more than her father, living alone. I'm not alone in my fear. I'll end up like my ex, who fears his next wife will leave him, and she does. I've grown wary of acrid greens. I brew bitter nail tea, serve kiwi and pepitas as antidotes to soothe my 2 grown daughters, thin as reeds, and not alone in their fear. They'll end up on some windswept coast, scudding along like sea foam, left quivering on damp sand. Okay, and this last poem, it could be placed anywhere. We talk about being placed, being displaced, and these places are sometimes simply emotional. Road to nowhere. The road to nowhere levitates, undulates, sweats and seethes in summer. In winter, buckles, cracks, swallows unsuspecting cars in potholes grown huge. Do you assume the macadam has no feeling for the wind, sun and moon and stars? Trucks rumble along its surface, pulling woolly horses and other cargoes unseen. Priests and thieves, immigrants and citizens, none with proper documents for this life or the next. Each passenger parts the air, stirs up dust. Some take to be blind to mirage. Willows genuflecting, reflected in a stream that may or may not hear their sighs. Kansas loves its open spaces bordering Oklahoma. Not that states know their names, boundaries marked on maps glowing with roads striking out across no man's land. Not your land, not my land. Travelers passing unidentified. For how long? We know not, care not, until the time we've strived for evaporates. The road to nowhere passes buried fragments of our ancestral bones, still singing, danger, wonder, wide surprise at the end. Thank you very much. And our last reader is Pam Harrison, one of the founding members of this group.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you, Tricia, and Clyde, especially for this, bringing us to this special place. When we decided on our topic as a place, I immediately thought of taking you on some trips with me to 3 of the very memorable places that my late husband took me. I knew when I met the guy that I would be going places that I would never get to on my own, and he certainly proved that to me. And it was quite an experience. He was a physician, and he was very committed to serving the underserved. And so we went to some rather exotic places where I had really very little to offer except my capacity to see, to look. And that was one of the foundational things that ultimately made me a poet. So I'm going to take you with me on three trips in sort of chronological order as I began to get my footing. 10 days at Moose Factory. A slow train plows past towns hunched in rummage, and the end of the line is no resort. Citizens of Moosonee mend their houses with cardboard, oil drums for lampstands, and rusting traps chink all night on the walls in the wind. I've done my sightseeing, love, seen where the river loses its way to the bay, frozen strand by curling strand as it wanders through the last of the trees. Children coast on their coattails, cheeky faces framed in dog ruff. Dog fur, it seems, doesn't freeze at 50 below. The kill comes in autumn when they keep wild pet packs in check. Pets are fair game, and dinner too if the hunting's been bad. Cockeyed crosses glint on old graves heaved to the sun. I don't mean to be hasty here, but love, breakup time is just about here. I don't fancy sinking through the ice with the truck that tries one crossing too many. I've paced around this threadbare flat till I know every sorry seam, have thumbed every magazine in town and cut my kinky dreams to hash while you keep flying farther north. Attawapaskat, Inujawak, Pavognatuk, flying to huts with antlers, mending knife wounds and taking pictures of the sun and moon sinking red and rising blue above the crackling ice. So cold your teeth ache. I changed my ticket to a single today. The couple upstairs have fought like dogs, slamming drawers and hurling curses meant to kill. Some places is just too tough to be a tourist. I'm heading back to the city, dear, where lovers hold hands in the soft night air. The streets are named and going somewhere. Okay, well, we're going to go from the Canadian Arctic now to the mountains of Honduras. Dennis was part of a group called ACTS, Americans Caring, Teaching, and Sharing, and they adopted a village called El Rosario and have gone back for 30 years to help El Rosario and its 10 neighboring towns in the mountains. El Rosario. Gringa baggage, wedged in the front seat of a bunged-up trooper, gripping roll bar and rear view to keep from sailing through the windshield like a stone on the road in the mountains of Honduras. I'm going now, I told the curious at home, to teach knitting in Rosario, but also to see my husband at his best, doing work natural to him as breathing, in a village so dismantled by United Fruit it has no crafts, sewing, or art, nothing gratuitously pretty except a flower scratched in the whitewash of a mountain house. In this place with no light after dark save the crackle of a campfire, where red beans dry in the dirt and field corn fills the porch of each house like the flotsam of a wreck, until the women shell it, twisting cob against dry cob with calloused hands, where crippled children pull themselves along like twisted toys through parasitic earth, and sturdy boys play barefoot in a field so besmirched with dung they smell to heaven when they're done, where the village water trickles through manure to a muddy pool. Here my man does what he can, tapping Francisco's chest, dispensing drugs, stitching Jose's machete wound, salving Carlo's burn. He pulls Pilar's rotten teeth with pliers. They throb in his palm like bloody stars. He's done it long enough to know he changes little but himself, leaves little in his wake, an echo of kindness. Patients come and go. I sit in the shade of the porch, knitting with the women, saving the fraying thread that knots like the uncombed hair on Xenia's head. She's hungry and hangs about the clinic like the botflies on the cattle sores. I fumble on in Spanish, grasping for verbs, unable to remember words I cannot see. Today, a little girl came on horseback, 3 hours riding through rough, eroded hills. Blind since birth, she sat in my lap. Staring toward her mother's voice, she ran her small hands over mine while I worked the needles and thread. She might have learned to knit, except the news was bad, and they must hurry home before the dark obscured their path. Now, what am I to do with the feel of her fingers, the side of her red dress disappearing down the road? And lastly, he took me to Africa. Oh, well, it wasn't the last trip we took together, but this is the last one I'm going to be reading tonight. A poem that is set in Kampala, Uganda, during the time of Idi Amin. At home in our ignorance, as in a canopy of trees, beauty mingles with menace here. Cerulean lizards blink in the hearts of scarlet flowers. Storks stalk the abattoir, and bandits sport machine guns. No taxi drives past dark. Askari roam the clinic, pointing bows and arrows from the bushes. Mothers sleep beneath the cots of children dying of tumors in their throats. We bunk in a lab where deep freezers keep Kaposi sarcoma tissue cold at 70 below. Ice cubes in a flash. New to Uganda, I buy a bracelet made of elephant hair, ostrich egg beads still oily from the skin of desert women. Jasper Semwanga's sister is a nurse. She wonders, would we visit him as his shamba behind the ward? Sick with pneumonia, panting softly, the young man batiks torn sheets. From a tumbled-down, wind-up Victrola, Mozart's violin lisps from the one warped record he owns. Jasper paints with shredded ends of sticks. He dreams of a life in Paris when he's well. Sweat drips from a brow as black as plum. Idi Amin bulldozes the boulevard to parade his tanks. Hired to teach his army aerial arts, Israeli pilots peel screaming over alabaster shrines and emerald hills. Rich Wazungu, that's white folks, rich Wazungu head for the coast. Would we sit their house a while, make ourselves at home? Home. Broken bottles spike concrete walls. Razor wire twists along the top. Sirens flare from the eaves. We are to feed 2 red Dobermans morning and night, 5 pounds of frozen beef. The dogs mistake us every meal. Open the door, they tear for our throats. We heave the meat like hand grenades. Torrential sun ticks on the metal roof, and dry petals fall like footsteps on the floor. Curling into yourself with cold, you sink into the quicksand of the bed. I pace from window to door, prisoner or guard. At dusk it seems some restlessness infests the trees. At a stroke, What I took for desiccated leaves sail from the crowns like wind-blown scarves. Bats swarming to feed. Time clots. I check the locks. Fever turns your urine black, and bruises dark stars spread across your back. And in fading light, I watch a woman sway downhill beneath a heavy load of sticks. Log drums ask and answer through the hours. The forest flickers red with fires. Taped anthems coil like pythons from the phone. You moan. I rinse and wring a cool cloth for your brow, dial and dial for help that doesn't come, hurl bloody joints into the snarling yard. Well, the doctor said I'd have to wait to be a widow, and all that happened passed into a tale. Jasper Simwanga died. His last batik now hangs above our bed. In the rhythm of its dance, young lovers stroll in a timeless space, her hand on his back, his arm at her waist. Thank you.